O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fill us all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. I want to talk about this situation where two Latin Mass priests were recently removed from public ministry due to some controversial positions that they took on the Novus Ordo. The Bishop of Covington has released a statement to his flock speaking about the removal and the reasons for it. We're going to take a look at that. I also want to take a look at the accompanying letter that was sent out to the bishops whenever Traditionis Custodes was released, because it actually ties into what is taking place with this situation. So we're going to take a look at that. But before we dive in, I want to remind you, hit that subscribe button. Help me grow Reason and Theology and reach more people with this content that you've been appreciating and benefiting from here on the channel. And by the way, while you're at it, hit that like button. Now, hey, look, the Missal of 62, what's sometimes called the Latin Mass, is a wonderful liturgy. In fact, it's something that has been approved by the church, and whatever has been approved and promulgated by the church can never be looked down on. And we have to recognize that it's something that needs to be respected and valued and honored in the church. There have been many instances historically where the church has discontinued some liturgies, even though this particular expression of the Roman Rite has not been discontinued. It's been restricted to a certain extent, but it has not been discontinued. However, there have been liturgies that have been outright discontinued. And even those, I want to say, look, if these were authentic expressions of the liturgy promulgated by the church, even if they're discontinued, we still have to value and respect those things. And I think that it's never a bad thing to want to preserve some of those things. So even preserving the Missal of 62, or what's called the Latin Mass, is not a bad thing. Wanting to preserve that is actually a good thing. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. In fact, I think that is something that should be done. So I'm of the opinion that preserving the Missal of 62, or the Latin Mass as it's called, is a worthy endeavor. But the question is how we go about doing that, not only effectively, but while remaining fully Catholic in our understandings of the liturgical expressions of the church. And I think this is kind of a teaching moment, what we're seeing here taking place with these two priests. This is an opportunity for us to learn on what to do and what not to do, frankly. Okay, so let's take a look at it. I want to share my screen, and you should be able to see the statement right around now. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so again, this is from the Office of the Bishop, Diocese of Covington. I believe this is Bishop Iffert. He says, now this is written to his parish, but it's of course a public statement. It is Our Lady of Lourdes parish. He says, my sincere prayers for peace and unity among us. I write to inform you that I've requested the resignation of Father Shannon Collins as pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes parish. I've also removed Father Sean as parochial vicar. For some time now, I had serious concerns about the parish's pastoral leadership. I attempted to resolve those concerns in conversation and fraternal correction with these priests, who are brothers and sons to me. Regretfully, I have been unable to do so. I take this action after becoming aware that Father Collins had preached in the parish that the holy sacrifice of the Mass, as celebrated in the current Roman Catholic liturgy, that's the Novus Ordo, is irrelevant, and it preserves literally nothing of the old. And that the reform of the liturgy was motivated by hatred towards traditional Catholics in the ancient liturgies of Rome. Let me stop there. Look, I don't know what his side of the story is and if he contests all that, and he might contest some of that. And my point, however, is to address the fact that regardless of what Father Collins has said and what the bishop says he's said, and whether or not that's authentic, I don't have a reason to believe that this isn't, but hey, there's always two sides to a story. Um, I have, however, seen people say things like this, right? That there's just effectively a promulgation of the liturgy in the Novus Ordo that was due to a hatred of traditional Catholicism, among other claims. And that's just simply not true. I used to believe that. I used to sincerely believe that, and was really, really big into um, the Missal of 62 and a critique of the Novus Ordo. And I'll have to say it was through a deep study of the Roman Rite and its history that really helped me appreciate the Novus Ordo better. I'll also tell you what helped me was my appreciation of the Divine Liturgy in the Byzantine tradition. That actually warmed me up more to the Novus Ordo. Some of y'all might be shocked by that, but in fact, that's the case. Um, and there's a lot of reasons why. Perhaps I could do a whole video on it, but having gleaned from and benefited from the Byzantine liturgy, it actually opened me up more to the Novus Ordo, because at one point I was just very, very, very opposed to it, very hostile to it, had a very negative view of the Novus Ordo. Now, I'm not talking about like a Novus Ordo where there's abuses. I'm just talking about the thing itself. I was opposed to the thing itself. So I understand where people are coming from when they say these things, but I think what it is they need better formation in many, many ways. That's what I needed at the time. I needed better formation. And a lot of my grievances and concerns were actually misplaced. And some of them were based on just false information. And it took me a long time to work through that. Okay, but let's continue here. So it continues, both Father Collins and Father Sean maintain these errors and refuse the opportunity to renounce them. So, I mean, if you're a bishop and you have priests who refuse to turn away from very, very serious errors of dissent against a liturgy promulgated by the church, then I could totally understand a bishop taking such action. And by the way, I think it goes both ways. I I would say this. Let's say you have a Novus Ordo priest who looks down on the Missal of 62 and wants to claim that it just preserved nothing of the tradition, and it was just completely illegitimate and it's irrelevant and it's, the worst thing ever. No, no, that's a schismatic mentality. If some Novus Ordo priest adopts that view, that is a schismatic mentality, because what you're basically saying is, for all these years that the church was using that liturgy and had promulgated it, you're basically saying that the church was just completely missing in action, out to lunch, didn't know what it was doing. No, you can't devalue a liturgy promulgated by the church like that. But again, it's the other way around too. The Novus Ordo, the Missal of 69 or 70, has been promulgated by the church. And we can't devalue it and degrade it and look down on it. We can certainly critique abuses, but that goes both ways. Abuses in a Latin Mass or a Novus Ordo, those are, worthy of critique. But when it comes to the thing itself, we can't devalue it, because these are liturgies that have produced saints, both the Novus Ordo and the Missal of 62 and other previous expressions of the Tridentine liturgy. It's produced saints. It's been promulgated by the church. You can't look down on it. Might we discuss what is more ideal? Might we have those conversations? Yes, we can have those conversations. But it's always a conversation of good versus ideal, never sinful and evil and bad versus good. That's not the discussion here. And that should never be it. And if a member of the clergy is taking that position and they refuse to be corrected, well, hey, I could totally understand them being disciplined. Now it continues. He says here, um, this disqualifies them from being granted permission to publicly celebrate the sacraments using the 1962 Roman Missal and from leading a personal parish like Our Lady of Lourdes. Well, so you recall with Traditionis Custodes, what the deal basically is. If you were ordained prior to a certain date, I forget what date it was specifically. If you were ordained prior to that, you just need the permission of your bishop to celebrate the Missal of 62. And if you're ordained after this certain time period, you need both the permission of the bishop and Rome. And we'll see why here in a moment. But this situation seems to actually bring out some of those reasons for that. But if one is going to take a position that, um, the Novus Ordo is irrelevant, it preserves nothing from the old, it was promulgated out of a hatred for the traditional Catholic faith and so on, I could totally understand their faculties being removed at that point. Because what we've done now is we've taken something great and good, the Missal of 62, the Latin Mass, if you will. We've taken something wonderful and then we've abused it and turned it into a weapon. And that's not okay. And again, I would say the exact same thing if a Novus Ordo priest tried to use the Novus Ordo as a weapon against the Missal of 62, saying, hey, prior to the liturgical reforms, the liturgy was trash, it's evil, it's bad. No. And if you're going to try to use the Novus Ordo for that, you need to be disciplined too, because that's not the purpose of the Novus Ordo. The purpose of the Novus Ordo was not promulgated to put down the Latin Mass. That was not what the Council Fathers wanted. That's not what Paul VI wanted. That was not the intention and motivation. So what would be taking place is somebody's taking something good and they're now using it as a weapon against the church itself. And no, you can't do that. And like I said, it goes both ways, right? Um, okay. So he says, I did not take this action lightly. I consulted with the vicar general, the deans, the judicial vicar, and brother bishops before determining the action I must take in this situation. I intend to provide for the pastoral and liturgical care of Our Lady of Lourdes Parish and hope to continue this ministry in the Diocese of Covington. There are, however, obstacles. The board of the missionaries of St. John the Baptist own the current church building. The missionaries of St. John the Baptist consider it the chapel of their public association. They are no longer willing to permit the Diocese of Our Lady of Lourdes Parish to use the building. I am seeking an appropriate location for the parish liturgies. Please be aware that I've removed Father Collins and Father Sean's faculties to teach, preach, or celebrate the sacraments of the church for the time being. They are to conduct no public ministry. They may celebrate a private mass for themselves, immediate family members, and members of the missionaries of St. John the Baptist. They are not permitted, however, to celebrate the mass publicly. Please do not ask them to violate this restriction. Okay, so that's pretty much the statement. Now, I want to take a look at a few other things here. Let me go to, I want to go to the accompanying letter that was sent out with Traditionis Custodes. I want us to take a look at why this was promulgated. Why did Pope Francis restrict the Missal of 62? Again, to reiterate, he didn't ban it. A lot of people say that. That's just not true. And I don't think it should be. I see somebody in the chat saying, "I hope that TLM is banned." I don't. I just hope that people stop abusing a good thing. It's kind of like this is why we can't have good things. Um, there's nothing wrong with wanting to preserve that expression of the liturgy. Just as really, there's nothing wrong with preserving any expression of the liturgy that the church has valued and promulgated. There's just nothing wrong with that. That's actually a good thing. I think it's a virtuous thing. There could be reasons why the church discontinues some things, and I totally grant that. That's within the authority of the church, and there might be practical reasons for it. But aside from those issues, I would say, look, there's nothing wrong with wanting to preserve the Missal of 62 in and of itself. I'm on board for that. Don't have an issue with it. I think that's great. My problem is when people now weaponize it. That's now the issue. When people weaponize it to degrade another liturgy, degrade other kinds of Catholics, who attend a different liturgy, to degrade a certain time period in the church, degrade the authority of the church, and so on. That's when we now have a problem. So I don't hope it's banned or discontinued, if you will. I just hope that people stop abusing a good thing. Now, that's not everybody, right? So there's some good people out there that would not abuse the Missile of 62. Um, but there are people who are abusing it, and that is kind of the concern and one of the reasons for the restriction. If you're weaponizing a good thing, you can understand why the Holy Father is going to restrict it. It's like if you're a parent and you see your child taking something good but then weaponizing it, you're going to restrict their access to that weapon. Even though it's not a weapon in and of itself, they're using it as one, so you're going to restrict their access to it until they're mature enough to stop doing that. Um, Now, there's a whole nother debate on whether or not it would be ideal to just have one expression of the Roman Rite and whether or not, the Missal of 62 does eventually need to be phased out so that there can be more liturgical unity in the Roman Rite. That's a whole nother discussion. I get it. I understand that. What I'm just saying is, aside from those considerations in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with wanting to preserve a particular expression of a liturgy. Again, there might be other considerations that we need to take into account, though. Oh, okay. So let me read this to you. Again, this is not Traditionis Custodes itself. This is the accompanying letter that Pope Francis sent out to the bishops, explaining to them why this was promulgated. So, letter of the Holy Father, Pope Francis, to the bishops of the whole world, that accompanies the apostolic letter motu proprio data Traditionis Custodes. All right. So this was 2021, July 16th. Dear brothers in the episcopate, just as my predecessor Benedict XVI did with Summorum Pontificum, I wish to accompany the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes with a letter explaining the motives that prompted my decision. People always ask, why did he need to release this? Why did he do it? Why did he do it? And I always have to say, just read the documents. Your answers are there. It's kind of like fiducia supplicans. Why was it released? Just read the document. It answers your question. It tells you why. So here it is. I turn to you with trust in the name of that shared solitude for the whole church that contributes supremely to the good of the universal church, as Vatican II reminds us. Most people understand the motives that prompted St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI to allow the use of the Roman Missal promulgated by St. Pius V and edited by St. John XXIII in 1962 for the Eucharistic sacrifice. And obviously there were a whole lot of, variants and changes between that time period. He's just, giving you a short statement. The faculty granted by the indult of the Congregation for Divine Worship in 84 and confirmed by John Paul II in Motu Proprio Ecclesia Dei in 88 was above all motivated by the desire to foster the healing of the schism with the movement of Bishop Lefebvre or Archbishop Lefebvre, right? Monsignor Lefebvre. So one of the reasons why faculties were granted for the celebration of the Missal of 62 was to help heal the schism of the Society of St. Pius X. There you go. He even calls it schism. With the ecclesial intention of restoring the unity of the church, the bishops were thus asked to accept with generosity the just aspirations of the faithful who requested the use of that missal. So if you had, people who were of goodwill and wanted to, preserve that liturgical expression, um, in an effort to heal the schism with the SSPX, this was granted. In other words, hey, if you guys want to preserve communion with Rome and you're not bashing Vatican II, and you have a healthy understanding of the conciliar reforms, but you have a preference for the Missal of 62, the church lovingly makes preservations for you. And as it should. There's nothing wrong with that. If you prefer the Missal of 62 over the Novus Ordo, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Preference is fine. Many in the church came to regard this faculty as an opportunity to adopt freely the Roman Missal promulgated by St. Pius V and use it in a manner parallel to the Roman Missal promulgated by St. Paul VI. In order to regulate the situation at the distance of many years, Benedict XVI intervened to address this state of affairs in the church. Many priests and communities had used with gratitude the possibility offered by the motu proprio of St. John Paul II. Underscoring that this development was not foreseeable in 88, the motu proprio Summorum Pontificum of 2007 intended to introduce a clear juridical regulation in the area in order to allow access to those, including young people, who, when they discover this liturgical form, feel attracted to it and find it in a form particularly suited to them, to encounter the mystery of the Holy Eucharist. Benedict XVI declared the Missal promulgated by St. Pius V and newly edited by Blessed John the 23rd as an extraordinary expression of the same lex orandi, granting a more ample possibility for the use of Missal of 62. So he expanded its access. In making their decision, they were confident that such a provision would not place in doubt one of the key measures of Vatican II or minimize in this way its authority. In other words, when Benedict did this, when he granted more access to it, it was assumed that this would not in any way be used to downplay Vatican II and its authority. The motu proprio recognized that, in its own right, the Missal promulgated by Paul VI is the ordinary expression of the lex orandi of the Catholic Church of the Latin Rite. The recognition of the Missal promulgated by St. Pius V as an extraordinary expression of the same lex orandi did not in any way underrate the liturgical reform, but was decreed with the desire to acknowledge the insistent prayers of these faithful, allowing them to celebrate the sacrifice of the Mass according to the editio typica of the Roman Missal promulgated by John the 23rd in 62, and never abrogated as the extraordinary form of the liturgy of the church. The Missal of 62 was never abrogated because it had there were provisions made for it immediately by Paul VI and also John Paul II. It comforted Benedict XVI in his discernment that many desired to find the form of the sacred liturgy dear to them, clearly accepted the binding character of Vatican II, and were faithful to the Pope and bishops. What is more, he declared to be unfounded the fear of division in parish communities, because the two forms of the use of the Roman Rite would enrich each other. That was the hope that Benedict had. And that's a great intention. That the Missal of 62 and John Paul not John Paul, but Paul VI Missal would mutually enrich each other. And that needs to take place, because there are some good things in the reforms of the liturgy that needed to take place. So there's some good that came out of it. But there's also some things in the Missal of 62 that are good that did not make their way in the Novus Ordo. And that's unfortunate. Some of those riches, some of those gems should be brought into the Novus Ordo. So the intention is that they would edify each other. Not that they would be put against each other, but they would complement each other. It's a great idea and intention. Thus, he invited the bishops to set aside their doubts and fears and to welcome the norms, attentive that everything would proceed in peace and serenity, with the promise that it would be possible to find resolutions in the event that serious difficulties came to light in the implementation of the norms once the motu proprio came into effect. With the passage of 13 years, I instructed the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to circulate a questionnaire to the bishops regarding the implementation of the motu proprio summorum pontificum. So, Pope Francis asks the bishops, how are things going in your diocese with summorum pontificum? The responses reveal a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene. Regrettably, the pastoral objection of my predecessors, who had intended to do everything possible to ensure that all those who truly possess the desire for unity would find it possible to remain in this unity or to rediscover it anew, has often been seriously disregarded. An opportunity offered by St. John Paul II, and with even greater magnanimity by Benedict XVI, intended to recover the unity of an ecclesial body with diverse liturgical sensibilities, was exploited to widen the gaps, reinforce the divergences, and encourage disagreements that injure the church, block her path, and expose her to the peril of division. Now, listen, he's saying some people used this good thing that they had with the Missal of 62 and this opportunity that Benedict granted to them. They exploited it. Not everybody, but some. Some exploited it and were abusing it and were causing division, not unity, separation. Now, when this came out, people said, oh, no, this isn't real. That's not true. Really? Interesting. Well, I think we're seeing an instance of this right now with the removal. So, I don't know. It seems that this situation in Covington might actually be backing up and concrete evidence of the concerns here. It continues, at the same time, I'm saddened by abuses in the celebration of the liturgy on all sides. So the Novus Ordo too. In common with Benedict XVI, I deplore the fact that in many places, the prescriptions of the new missal are not observed in celebration, but indeed come to be interpreted as an authorization for, or even requirement of, creativity, which leads to almost unbearable distortions. So abuses in the Novus Ordo, disregard for the rubrics. But I'm nonetheless saddened that the instrumental use of the Roman Missal of 62 is often characterized by a rejection not only of the liturgical reform, but of Vatican II itself, claiming with unfounded and unsustainable assertions that it betrayed the tradition and the true church. Did you see that? Well, what did we hear earlier? That Vatican II is basically an attack on the traditional liturgy. It's an attack on traditional Catholicism. It's an attack on the Roman Rite. So what Pope Francis was speaking about here, the feedback he was getting from the bishops, saying, hey, some people are exploiting this and using it to dissent from the authority of the church and even from Vatican II, the most recent ecumenical council. If you had any doubts whether or not that was true, well, here's a situation that bears that out. The path of the church must be seen with the dynamic of tradition, which originates from the apostles and progresses in the church with the assistance of the Holy Spirit. A recent stage of this dynamic was constituted by Vatican II, where the Catholic episcopate came together to listen and to discern the path for the church indicated by the Holy Spirit. I think a lot of people haven't come to terms with that, and that's part of the problem. Better formation needs to take place. We need to come to terms with that. I used to attend a Latin mass, and I was talking to the priest, and I was very enthusiastic about the Latin mass and very much opposed to the Novus Ordo. And I said, do you think that the Novus Ordo is just going to kind of go away? We can just go back to the Latin mass. And he said something to me that I didn't want to hear, but you know what? It was something I needed to hear. And he just straight up said, look, the Novus Ordo is not going anywhere. So you need to get used to it. In other words, you need to come to terms with why the reform took place. Now, obviously, we can critique some aspects of the reform, how effective it was, things that need to be reformed from the reform, sure. But there's a reason why the liturgy was reformed. And you need to come to terms with that. You need to be able to digest that. What were the reasons? Why did this entire episcopate, this entire college of bishops, want to reform the liturgy? And in fact, did reform the liturgy. To doubt the council is to doubt the intentions of those very fathers who exercised their collegial power in a solemn manner with Peter and under Peter in an ecumenical council. And in the final analysis, to doubt the Holy Spirit himself who guides the church. Bingo. What's at the heart ultimately of those who are trying to pit the Latin Mass against the Novus Ordo is ultimately a spirit of schism and a spirit of dissent that is an attack on the magisterium itself and its authority. That's at the root of it. So whenever a person tries to oppose these liturgical expressions in the kind of way that we're seeing, it's an attack on the magisterium and its authority. The very magisterium, by the way, that promulgated the Latin Mass. It's the same magisterium of Jesus Christ that promulgated the Novus Ordo. And it was promulgated with the exact same authority in an apostolic constitution. So if we are going to attack the authority behind the promulgation of the Novus Ordo, you inevitably attack the authority that promulgated the Missal of 62. And so there's a problem there, right? That's ultimately at the heart here. So that's an issue that has to be corrected. We have to see it in the way that Benedict saw it, a mutual enrichment. If we could not weaponize the Missal of 62 and actually digest what Benedict was saying in Summorum Pontificum, there wouldn't be an issue. There wouldn't be a need for restricting the Missal of 62. It continues. The objective of the modification of the permission granted by my predecessors is highlighted by the Second Vatican Council itself. From the voda submitted by the bishops, there emerged a great insistence on the full, conscious, and active participation of the whole people of God in the liturgy, along lines already indicated by Pius XII in the encyclical Mediator Dei on the renewal of the liturgy. The Constitution, Sacrosanctum Concilium, confirmed this appeal by seeking the renewal and advancement of the liturgy, and by indicating the principles that should guide the reform. In particular, it established that these principles concerned and the Roman rite and other legitimate rites were applicable, and asked that the rites be revised carefully in the light of sound tradition, and that they be given a new vigor to meet present-day circumstances and needs. Sorry, I'm adjusting my heater here. It's right by my feet. On the basis of these principles, a reform of the liturgy was undertaken with its highest expression of the Roman Missal, published in the Editio Typica by St. Paul VI, and revised by Editio Typica by St. Paul VI, and revised by St. John Paul II. It must be therefore maintained that the Roman rite, adapted many times over the course of the centuries according to the needs of the day, not only be preserved but renewed in faithful observance of tradition. Whoever wishes to celebrate with devotion according to earlier forms of the liturgy can find in the Reformed Missal, according to Vatican II, all the elements of the Roman Rite, in particular, the Roman canon, which constitutes one of its more distinctive elements. This is actually the position of Benedict XVI. Benedict in Summorum Pontificum says these are not two separate rites. And he argues that this is one rite in just two expressions of it. So he doesn't see like this substantial break between these two rites. So you can't say, nothing from the old has been preserved in the new. Absurd. What an absurd thing to say. That completely goes against Benedict XVI in Summorum Pontificum, who says the exact opposite. So if you have a priest out there who's weaponizing the Missal of 62, the Latin Mass, and he's saying, "Oh, the Reformed liturgy that was done to, out of hatred for the traditional liturgy and the traditional faith and traditional Catholicism, and it preserves nothing from the old." That's just not Benedict's view in Summorum Pontificum. That's just not true, factually or according to what the magisterium has said. And so there's an opportunity for deeper formation. And as long as a person responds with humility and docility and is willing to learn, okay, great. But if a person says, "No, no, 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 this is how it is and I'm not going to change," well, I can understand why the bishop would say, "Sorry, going to remove your faculties." Whoever wishes to celebrate with devotion according to earlier forms of the liturgy can find in the Reformed Missal, according to Vatican II, all the elements of the Roman Rite. A final reason for my decision is this, even more plain in the words and attitudes of many, and the close connection between the choice of celebrations according to liturgical books prior to Vatican II and the rejection of the church and her institutions in the name of what is called the true church. One is dealing here with comportment that contradicts communion and nurtures the divisive tendency. I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollo, I belong to Cephas, I belong to Christ, against which the Apostle Paul so vigorously reacted. In defense of the unity of the body of Christ, I'm constrained to revoke the faculty granted by my predecessors. The distorted use that has been made of this faculty is contrary to the intentions that led to granting the freedom to celebrate the Mass with the Missal of 62. So they granted this previously, hoping that would foster mutual enrichment and unity. And instead, according to the bishops, when they're asked, "Hey, how's it going in your territory?" they're sending back a lot of feedback saying, "Actually, it's not going good. There's a lot of disunity. There's a lot of rupture. There's a lot of people putting these two things against each other." Is this situation that we're seeing right now with the two priests evidence of that? It continues, because liturgical celebrations are not private actions, but celebrations of the church, which is the sacrament of unity. They must be carried out in communion with the church. Vatican II, while it reaffirmed the external bonds of incorporation in the church, the profession of faith, the sacraments of communion, affirmed with St. Augustine that to remain in the church not only with the body, but also with the heart is a condition for salvation. Yes. There's some people who are still members externally in the Catholic Church, but internally, they've left the Catholic Church. They're in schism internally. They're still there on paper, but internally, they're gone. Dear brothers in the Episcopate, Sacramentum Sacrosanctum Concilium explained that the church, the sacrament of unity, is such because it is the holy people gathered and governed under the authority of the bishops. Lumen Gentium, while recalling that the Bishop of Rome is the permanent, invisible principle and foundation of the unity, both of the bishops and of the multitude of the faithful, states that you, the bishops, are the visible principle and foundation of the unity of your local churches, in which and through which exists the one and only Catholic Church. I mean, that's just straight out of Ignatius of Antioch, right? Responding to your requests, I take the firm decision to abrogate all the norms, instructions, permissions, and customs that precede the present motu proprio, and declare that the liturgical books promulgated by the saintly pontiffs Paul VI and John Paul II, in conformity with the decrees of Vatican II, constitute the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite. I think that could be expressed better. what because he later on still speaks of the extraordinary versus ordinary form. So it's like he probably needs to explain a little bit more what he means there. I take comfort in this decision from the fact that after the Council of Trent, St. Pius V also abrogated all the rites that could not claim a proven antiquity, establishing for the whole Latin Church a single Missale Romanum. That's quo primum, of course. For 4 centuries, the Missale Romanum, promulgated by St. Pius V, was thus the principal expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite and functioned to maintain the unity of the Church. Precisely, which is why we can't degrade it and speak of it as somehow harmful to souls or destructive or bad or evil. No, you can't put down the Missal of 62 like that, or the Missal of Pius V, without denying the dignity and grandeur of this rite. The bishops gathered in an ecumenical council asked that it be reformed. Right, so Vatican II was not putting down the Missal of 62 in the Tridentine liturgy. Their intention was that the faithful would not assist as strangers and silent spectators in the mystery of faith, but with a full understanding of the rites and prayers would participate in the sacred action consciously, piously, and actively. And I'll tell you, once you really go to the Byzantine liturgy, you'll appreciate the Novus Ordo a lot more on this particular point, because you do have that much more in the Byzantine tradition. St. Pius VI, recalling that the work of adaptation of the Roman Missal had already been initiated by Pius XII, declared that the revision of the Roman Missal, carried out in the light of ancient liturgical sources, had the goal of permitting the Church to raise up in the variety of languages a single and identical prayer that expressed her unity. This unity I intend to reestablish throughout the Church of the Roman Rite. He's trying to bring back the way it was in the preconciliar period, when there was, more unity in its liturgical expression in the Roman Rite. Admirable. One could question whether or not now is the time and how to go about doing that, but one could certainly question that. But admirable in the long term. Vatican II, when it described the Catholicity of the people of God, recalled that within the ecclesial communion there exists the particular churches which enjoy their proper traditions without prejudice to the primacy of the Chair of Peter, who presides over the universal communion of charity, guarantees legitimate diversity, and together ensures that the particular not only does not injure the universal, but also serves it. So he is the one who guarantees communion and unity and the liturgical expressions in the church, that they foster unity, not that they're being used to cause division. While in the exercise of my ministry in the service of unity, I take the decision to suspend the faculty granted by my predecessors. I ask you to share with me this burden as a form of participation in the solicitude for the whole church proper to bishops. So remember, again, it has not been discontinued, but what he's saying is, if you are going to celebrate the Missal of 62, your local bishop, if you're ordained after this certain time period, your local bishop has to approve, and then Rome is going to approve. Now, this doesn't impact, like the FSSP and stuff like that. Pope Francis already clarified that. This is for what takes place on the diocesan level. In the motu proprio, I've desired to affirm that it is up to the bishop, as moderator, promoter, and guardian of the liturgical life of the church, of which he is the principle of unity, to regulate the liturgical celebrations. So he needs to ultimately make the call here. Again, if a person is ordained after a particular date, Rome also has to give its approbation. It is up to you to authorize in your churches as local ordinaries the use of the Missale Romanum of 1962, applying the norms of the motu proprio. It is up to you to proceed in such a way as to return to a unitary form of celebration, and to determine case by case the reality of the groups which celebrate the Missale Romanum. So he's putting a whole lot more authority into the hands of the bishops. Indications about how to proceed in your diocese are chiefly dictated by two principles. On the one hand, to provide for the good of those who are rooted in the previous form of celebration and need to return in due time to the Roman Rite, promulgated by St. Paul VI and John Paul II. So there's an intention to eventually bring one liturgical expression in the Roman Rite to bring about unity. So that's kind of like the long-term goal, is that there would be this one form of the Roman Rite again, not these two expressions of it. And on the other hand, to discontinue the erection of new personal parishes tied more to the desire and wishes of individual priests than to the real need of the holy people of God. At the same time, I ask you to be vigilant in ensuring that every liturgy be celebrated with decorum and fidelity to the liturgical books promulgated after Vatican II, without eccentric, wow, eccentricities, cities. Boy, I'm butchering that one. That can easily degenerate into abuses. So, I mean, that he would, they would root out any eccentric expressions in the liturgy, and that they would also root out abuses and stuff like that. Seminarians and new priests should be formed in the faithful observance of the prescriptions of the missal and liturgical books in which it is reflected. The liturgical reform willed by Vatican II upon you, I invoke the Spirit of the risen Lord, that he may make you strong and firm in your service to the people of God entrusted to you by the Lord, so that your care and vigilance express communion, even in the unity of one single rite, in which is preserved the great richness of the Roman liturgical tradition. I pray for you. You pray for me, Francis. Okay, I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as Traditionis Custodes, and you can certainly go and look at them again at your own leisure. But I think the point is pretty clear. The whole purpose of, again, Traditionis Custodes was because people were abusing the Missal of 62. So it's to help root out that disunity. And so I find situations like this with the two priests unfortunate, because it just proves the need for Traditionis Custodes, which I think is sad, because it would have been a really good thing if we could have just had the Missal of 62 and the Novus Ordo mutually enriching each other. But it's like, this is why we can't have good things. So it's unfortunate. What people needed to do was prove Pope Francis and the bishops wrong. Instead, you'll notice right after the issuing of Traditionis Custodes, they proved them right, because the dissenters started to push back against the authority of the Holy Father, the magisterium, all of that. They just proved them right. Instead of saying, no, you completely got us wrong, we're going to be obedient, they just proved them right, saying, we're going to resist you even more. Well, there you go. There's a need for Traditionis Custodes, unfortunately. And notice now how people are putting a spin on this. I'll share my screen. Canceled. Covington Bishop strips 2 traditional priests of faculties for opposing the new mass. He's canceled. Well, I think we're kind of used to how people spin these things. So now, a bishop who rightly disciplines his priest, that's called canceling? Is that really our position? So according to Scripture, the bishop has the authority to discipline those in his territory who are in error. And if they're obstinately in error, he could certainly remove them from ministry. That's canceling? No, that's called biblical. That's called church discipline. But you'll notice that people take these true things that are found in Scripture and they try to spin them and say, it's cancel culture. In fact, the very people who are saying, cancel, we're being canceled, they're the cancel culture. You'll notice they're the very ones who end up canceling good and faithful bishops, even the Holy Father. So it's just interesting how, it's ironic how there seems to be maybe some hypocrisy taking place there. But this is unfortunate, because I think that this just proved Traditionis Custodes right. And, I think people should have proved Pope Francis wrong. So it's tragic. I hope y'all found this, however, helpful in making sense of this situation, in light of, I'm sure, plenty of other voices saying the exact opposite, saying it's cancel, it's persecution of faithful priest, blah, 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 blah. I hope this has helped put things into perspective for you. If it has, let me know that. Put that in the comment section. Hit the like button. And of course, check me out at patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support this ministry. And of course, hit that subscribe button while you're at it. All right, we'll see you later. God bless. Hey, everybody. Have you heard people claim that Pope Francis denied the existence of hell or worshipped an idol in the Vatican, or even the claim that he forbids Catholics to evangelize? If you've come across claims like these and you don't know what to make of them, I have just the book for you. It's called Top 10 Lies About Pope Francis Exposed. This book is available to you for free. Simply go to reasonandtheology.podia.com, provide your email address, and you'll receive your free PDF copy. The link is below in the show notes, so just simply go there, click on that link, and get your copy today. Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy and engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today. For years, Catholics have been made to feel humiliated and ashamed for defending the Pope and the teachings of the Church. This shaming comes not only from non-Catholics, but even from fellow Catholics who mock the Pope and fight against the Church's teachings. Are you sick of being made to feel embarrassed for standing with the Church? I stand with you. For several years, I've been producing content showing why we can be confident in clinging to the Catholic magisterium. If you stand for restoring support for the Church, help me continue this mission of producing apologetic content that defends the magisterium by becoming a supporter on Patreon. The link is below, patreon.com/reason and theology. Christus vincit.